fresh, pure, and energizing milk. Bourbon on the rock.
All right, and welcome to the second episode of Milk and Bourbon. If you notice the new music, I've got to shout out my buddy Rob Dunnenberger. I hadn't spoken to him in 13 years since we were in high school together. And he provided me with this music within 24 hours, and he offered to do it for me. Incredible guy, incredible musician. Take the chance to look up Free Union on Spotify, Free Union. They're jack of all trades. They've kind of got this funky rock, smooth, jazz-influenced vibe going about them. Their lead singer is incredible, and you won't regret looking them up. So Free Union on Spotify, definitely look them up. And thank you again, Rob. I appreciate you, man. Today we're going to be talking about 2030 by Marl Guillen. I told you guys about this last time. This author takes the opportunity to look into the future about 10 years, 2030, so 9 years now, but when he wrote it, he's looking 10 years out, basing off of everything that he can get information on now, and he starts taking some liberties to kind of paint a picture of what we can look to in the future. And I can tell you throughout this whole book, I was thinking to myself, what could I use to my advantage by reading this here in 2021 to prepare myself better for those times in 2030. And there's just so much to think about when you read this book. And honestly, today I'm not going to cover even all of it. There's just so much to cover. So I'll kick it off, but know that I'm not covering everything in the book. It's an incredible book. I'll give you the rating here at the end of this brief synopsis. But the first thing that you read about in this book is how India successfully launched a probe to Mars. And I know you guys are like, oh, here he goes with that Mars shit again. And India successfully launches this probe to Mars on their first try, which is something that the United States, Russia, China, Japan, no one else can really lay claim to. And they did it for $76 million. And you might be thinking, that is a hefty sum. But it's less than half what Interstellar cost to film, and about $32 million cheaper than The Martian took to film. So you're really talking about pennies on the dollar here, and they're doing it successfully. And they're doing it in a realm that the United States and Russia claims to lay the lion's share of success in. And we're just not like that anymore. We're not number one in everything anymore. And it reminded me of a video that I saw on YouTube a long time ago, and it took me a little bit to find it. But it's from an HBO show called Newsroom, and I think it was filmed in 2012, or at least this episode was. But they're having this forum, some newscasters, some politicians, they're having this forum at a local college, and one of the questions is, why is America the best? And the guy goes on to entail, and now some of those numbers are a little bit inflated, but he kind of hits the nail on the head. We're not the greatest anymore. Here's some facts and figures. Among the 12 top economies in the world, we have the highest infant mortality rate and the lowest life expectancy at 45th and 46th, respectively, according to Consortium News. And, I mean, he goes on and talks about literacy rates, math and science proficiency, everything you can think of. And that's how this author starts out, like, hey, America's not going to be number one in anything anymore unless we start changing some things. And we need to stop thinking that we are. Next chapter, he goes on, he's talking about following the babies. The birth rate in America is falling precipitously. We're going to age rapidly in the coming years. Markets are going to shift towards marketing not only towards older people, but older people in the Far East. And it would do companies well to hop on that train. And he goes on actually to talk about what will be the emergence of Africa if some things fall into place. Because for every one United States child that is born, there are 10.2 exactly born in Africa. Despite them being one of the largest land masses, the largest continent, on the planet, as far as landmass goes, they are a net importer of food. They ship in their food. And it's because of practices of these small farmers over there. And I'm just going to read it straight off. Some subsistence farmers laughed off the idea that if they prepared the fields properly, used the right seeds, and used fertilizers, their harvest would multiply 10 times. And the way to get Africa into the future, into 2030 being the leader that we believe it will be, especially with the population size that it's going to be boasting, with Nigeria being in the top 5 and Ghana following in closely behind, what we need to do is inform and educate these farmers. Africa's path to the future is informing these farmers and transforming them into sophisticated agriculturists. And one of the things that the author mentions, Mauro Guillen, he mentions the Kosovo Plant, which is the third leading starch plant behind wheat and corn in the world, and it has a growing emergence in beer production, and it's very easy to make, very hardy of a crop. It'll survive most things, and it's perfectly built for Africa and Africa's climate. Like I said, very drought resistant, and it can be harvested any time within an 18-month window. So it's not like, it's here one day, gone the next. You've missed your window. It's a very hardy plant, and it's something that people that are trying to aid these farmers in Africa with by introducing them to these types of crops. And Mr. Guillen, I don't know if I should call him Mauro, we're not best friends, but Mr. Guillen goes on to talk about other populations, and he moves towards immigration and immigration law and immigrants and their impact on the United States. The conventional wisdom is that migrants displace blue-collar workers and steal good manufacturing jobs, but in reality, the immigrants that are coming in are taking in a lot more of the agriculture jobs. They're not really competing with blue-collar workers that are American-born in the manufacturing industry. In fact, what's replacing their jobs faster than anything is the automation of the manufacturing industry. So it's not immigrants that are taking these blue-collar jobs. It's robots, for lack of a better term. Most immigrants, when they come over, they have either very little skills or very high-level skills, and as a result, they don't have that good employment opportunity that they would in their home country if they were. So what I'm trying to say is the middle class in the home country has plenty of work. It's the people with limited skills and the people with high-end, top-end skills that aren't getting their jobs in their home country, and that's why they're coming over here. So they're not even replacing our middle class, which is another thing that is usually spouted off about when we talk about immigration law, is that these immigrants are taking our jobs. And I'm certain a lot of you are like, why do I care what a white man thinks about immigration law? And that's a good point. But what I've done is I've really started researching into this stuff because I care about being well informed about things that are hot topics being immigration law, especially since Biden reintroduced the green card, which had been shut off by Trump for almost a full year, not only because of COVID, but because of Syria and some of the issues with immigration over in Europe. Trump kind of got afraid, got scared, and he shut off green cards for almost a full year. And those effects are being felt in a rippling manner. It's causing a whole lot of issues. Another complaint is that illegal immigration represents a financial burden on hard-working taxpayers in America. And according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, immigrants accounted for 47% of an increase in the workforce in the U.S. and 70% in Europe since 1990, and tend to contribute more in taxes than they receive in benefits from the government programs. Off payroll and income taxes alone, immigrants are contributing more than they receive back from the government. Companies founded or co-founded by immigrants include Google, Intel, eBay, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Tesla. A quarter of all high-tech, high ventures are started by immigrants. Greater than 50% of American companies valued over 100 billion. Greater than 50% of American companies valued over $1 billion are started by immigrants. In 2016, 8 million undocumented workers contributed $13 billion in payroll taxes while not being able to claim Social Security benefits, and they were still paying for Social Security taxes. So the point here that I'm trying to make with all these figures are that immigrants are contributing. And as you'll see in the next chapter that he brings up, they're not just contributing in the amount of money they're giving or flooding into the economy, but they're providing this youth that we're no longer able to sustain with our aging population and our low birth rate. And that's what he goes on to say in this next chapter. Gray is the new black. The Western world is graying at an incredibly fast rate. People over 60 are 80% of America's net worth. The silent generation, which is the generation before boomers, holds roughly 23 times the wealth of millennials. Gray consumers, older people over 50, spending power is rated at $20 trillion by 2030. Moody's Analytics reported in 2014 that American adults under the age of 35 had a negative savings rate of minus 1.8%, meaning we had to borrow in order to sustain our consumption rate. And even with that being factored in, our consumption rate is being far outstripped by our abilities to earn, and it's still minuscule when compared to the graying generations. And what this means is companies just need to start designing their strategy to market to these older generations. Dad, this is for you. They need to start giving you those big text screens, bigger phones. And what's crazy is our government is unwittingly contributing to preventing the flow of money from these graying generations to any industry aside from healthcare. 14% of the income, let's say pension or however Social Security benefits, however these older generations are getting their money, 14% of it is going towards healthcare in America, as opposed to 3% in, in the UK. And I think we're missing a huge opportunity here to capitalize on this aging population in America because they're spending more, they're worth more, but they're spending more on healthcare, obviously, because they usually go through greater health crises as they get older. And if we were to socialize healthcare, which is such a bad word to a lot of people that I'm close to, yes, it represents a greater burden on the younger generations and really all generations involved. But what it does is it frees open our most wealthy portion of our country to spend it on other things, clothing, cars, what have you. Their spending attitudes definitely shift too as people grow older. They're more willing to spend, less willing to save, because what they were saving for is for their later years in life, their golden years, and they've reached it now. So now they want to enjoy the fruits of their labor. They're going to be willing to spend more money on things that they don't necessarily need and more just want: boats, vehicles, travel, clothes, jewelry, eating out. Everything's going to be easier for an older person, one of those golden generations, to spend money as opposed to saving it. And just as an aside here, I'm going to take this opportunity to talk to you about this, that throughout this whole book, and I mentioned this at the beginning, this book kind of got me thinking about these emerging trends, and it got me thinking about how I didn't really, I barely know what I'm doing next week sometimes. I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow sometimes. And I've tried to do better with that, and I'm trying to do better with it still. But this book kind of realigns your thinking to more of a deep understanding of what these trends mean. And as you'll see when I talk about stocks over the next couple of weeks and the next couple episodes, you'll see, hopefully, that this change in thinking has started to have a benefit on my habits, my spending habits, my planning habits. This book just kind of opens you up to, there's second, third, fourth order effects to everything that you do and every choice that you make. on a myopic level, and then on a macro level, there's going to be trends that you read about that you don't really attribute to any sort of change, but what may be affecting one sector, like the chip shortage, did I think that it was going to have a major impact on tech industry sell-offs, or did I have it having that much of an impact on production for cars? No. Did I think that it was going to affect their stocks? Not at the time. When I first read about it, I didn't think about those second and third order effects. And this book kind of gives you the opportunity to look into that and really think about it differently. Next, I want to talk about the ladies, women. Mr. Guillen devotes a whole chapter to the glass ceiling, the amount of involvement women have in the higher levels of politics and industry, and he paints a pretty sad picture. A pretty sad picture, but a picture that's improving. And I want to be careful here because I don't want anyone to think that like I'm satisfied with the amount of representation women get in these high-level CEO, CFO, politician, senator, representative level of influence, because I think that we have a long ways to go, but I do think that we've made some good steps, and that's what I'm going to outline here. Not only the negative, but also the positive, because I'm trying to be more positive, less pessimistic. Mr. Guillen's not helping me here because he does paint a pretty stark picture for what women face in the workforce, but here goes. Women are now, and this has been true for at least the past decade that I can think of, at least since I've been in college, women are now earning the greater share of undergrad and grad degrees in the United States. More than 40% of married women out-earn their husbands. By 2030, more than half the world's wealth will be held by women, according to Mr. Guillen in his book, 2030. And what does that mean for spending habits? Women seem to spend more money on education, healthcare, and insurance, which currently accounts for 30% of the U.S. economy already. So when women represent more than 50% of the wealth in America, and they're going to be aging older women based off of those previous chapters, you're getting a huge jump in those industries, and that's something that what I was just talking about with looking ahead towards the future, how can I benefit from that? And that may seem selfish, but I definitely always think about what do I need to do to foresee changes in the behavior of our economy, of our markets. And this is one of those things where you don't think about it automatically. You don't even know to draw that comparison. But if there's an aging population of women that currently hold more than 50% of the wealth of the United States by 2030, what are they going to do with that money? And if the healthcare system continues as it is, and it's so expensive as it is, and pharmaceuticals continue to charge like they have been over the past as long as I've been alive, then how can I derive some benefit from that I wouldn't typically? Another interesting fact that I read is that women's spending behaviors in the market, while in the short term, men see more benefit, they definitely make more in the short term. Because men are so more risky in their behaviors, they actually lose more money over time than women do in the market. And this is just generally. And obviously, I don't even want to talk about it too much, and maybe this is one of those things where I need to start actually looking into this and further understanding it to derive some benefit from it. But the way the market's been behaving with Wall Street bets on Reddit, and I know that's the majority of that population is men, and how they're behaving with stocks and how they're treating the stock market definitely kind of solidifies what Mr. Guillen is saying in his book about women's attitudes towards stocks compared to men. All right, so I've said some positive things about women, but there's definitely some negatives as far as society and their treatment of women is going. Currently today, an estimated 650 million women are married off as minors, mostly in Asia and Africa. But it's not just Asia and Africa either. Even places like Switzerland reported that in 1 year's time, 1,400 minors were married off to much older gentlemen. Women in 45 countries do not have the same legal ability or capacity to act or engage in economic transactions. 32 countries don't have equal inheritance rights. Women are estimated to spend 4 hours a day of unpaid domestic work compared to the 1.7 hours a day that men do the same. Fewer women run companies than men named John. In Fortune 500 companies, women make up less than 5% of CEOs. The U.S. has less women in political positions, and this was early 2020, so this might have shifted a little bit with Biden taking over, but women occupied less political positions in America than women did in Saudi Arabia. And while I have no problem saying that we definitely have some work to do, I'm just going to read two statements that were from a self-help book in the 1940s, and it was geared for women. Statement number 1, warning, be careful not to seem smarter than your man. And then 2, by playing up to the male ego, she accomplishes the near impossible, making her man feel like a man, like it's the woman's job to make a man feel like a man. So I think there's positives and negatives to all of this. I think there's definitely a ton of work we need to do. I think that what will occur naturally as women gain more wealth and more power due to that wealth by 2030, and as people age and as these new societal norms start taking hold, I do believe that we'll see even more positive change. Do I want it to happen quicker? Of course. Do things happen quickly in American society or really the world in general? I don't think so. So very proud of how far we've come, knowing that there's definitely a lot more that we can do. And then we get to like one of my most favorite parts of the book. The chapter is called Cities Drown First. And it's just full of amazing facts. For instance, every week, 1.5 million people move from rural areas to the cities. Cities account for 75% of the total energy consumption and 80% of carbon emissions. I mean, the facts go on. And this is where it gets bad. Just based off that information that these cities are accounting for the majority of these carbon emissions. There's been several panels, one of them being the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that have stated that if we don't reduce even our 2010 levels of carbon emissions by 45% within the next 10 years, there's going to be some irreversible changes to the climate that we've caused that just can't be undone. The same panel actually said that by 2050 we need to be at net zero carbon emissions. And the first time that we beat or at least met the Paris Climate Agreement goal for carbon emissions was this past year due to COVID. We would need to do that for the next 25 years to reduce the amount of impact we've had over the last 100. Which is a lot of information just to say we are on a path right now that is not sustainable. There's another book that I read called Green Plastics, and it's a couple years old, so I had to look up some of the stats and see if it's changed, and it did change a little bit because we've discovered some more fossil fuels in the meantime, but we have enough fossil fuels for the next 44 years at our current rate of consumption. So 44 years. And that's just talking about the availability. That's not talking about the ethical or the long-term effects that our consumption is doing towards this planet. I think that I belabor that point. It's very essential that we start taking this shit seriously. The next thing I want to talk about there's the growth that cities are experiencing is the increase in sedentary lifestyle. I can't speak for the world, but I can speak for the U.S. and some of these facts. Currently, 2 of 5 American adults have a BMI classifying them as obese. 2 of 3 classifies them as overweight. So 66%, the vast majority, are overweight in America. And this is where it gets sad. 41 million preschool children are overweight or obese. And that's a shame because children start off their lives unhealthily. They're going to continue to do that because it's a learned behavior. That behavior falls squarely on parents' shoulders. Another interesting fact, the U.S. population represents 4% of the global population, but because of its body mass, it represents 18% of the total human body mass on the planet. That excess body mass actually accounts for an additional 1 billion people just in America alone. And that's where I'm going to kind of call it on this book, aside from what he says we need to change in order to get better. Because there's so much interesting stuff in this book. If you haven't read it, please go read it. I will give you that rating. Don't fear. But here's some things that we can do. And this is something that we actually talked about at my work the other day, and it's a thing called nudging. You can't really force people to change their behaviors, but you can nudge them towards the right behavior. A good example, by etching the image of a housefly in a men's urinal on Amsterdam's Schiphol airport, the designers improved the aim, they put this in quotations, improved the aim of users, which reduced janitorial costs. Just putting that little sticker of a housefly on the urinal nudged these men to, hey, try aiming, man. Like, try handling your business appropriately. Don't pee on the damn floors. And that leads to another example. Energy bills that compare your monthly bill to the usage of people around you actually drives energy costs down, because no one wants to be the most energy greedy person in the neighborhood, because you go out to your neighbors, you're listed last, and everyone knows you're listed last. It's that kind of nudging. So that leads me to my next point about what we can do to make things better, and that's cities taking on some of the burden themselves. One of the coolest concepts that I read in the whole book was the concept of vertical farming. It's a concept that's taking root in a lot of cities that have struggled since manufacturing jobs started to move overseas. So the Detroits and the Pittsburghs of the Americas, for instance, they started vertical farming. And the essential idea is you use these old manufacturing plants and you vertically build these platforms that you start growing local foods on. And what it does is a lot of cool things. One thing, it reduces water use. In an industry that already requires so much, this vertical farming concept, this finally a trickle-down concept that actually works, reuses water and the nutrients from plants above to help with plants below. It saves on space. Obviously, vertical farming, we're utilizing these vertical areas and maximizing the square footage of these plants. It reduces the amount of time for produce to get to the market. One figure that one of the owners in Detroit mentioned was that if you're getting a piece of, let's say you're getting cabbage from California, it takes 7 to 10 days and a lot of resources to get it to you. But if you're resourcing from those local vertical farms, it gets to you within 48 hours, doesn't need to be refrigerated, doesn't need to be transported. So it has a much more green of an effect on production. And here's where Mr. Guillen kind of goes into these 7 steps that you can use to improve your own station in life and improve the station of other people around you's life. Number 1, lose sight of the shore. Don't be afraid to go from what you know. Me doing this is so far from something that I'm accustomed to doing typically, and it's been one of the greater joys already of my life. It's connected me with people, like in the case of Rob Dunnenberger, that I hadn't seen or talked to in 13 years, and he's not the only case of me getting in contact with people that I haven't talked to in a long time. A lot of people that are creative have started reaching out to me. Just the creative process itself has been very rewarding of an experience for me. So don't be afraid to lose sight of the shore. Don't stick to the things you know all the time. There are some things that, obviously, I'm going to continue to go to my job. But when given the opportunity to try something new, don't be afraid. It could be one of the most rewarding parts of your life. Number 2, diversify with purpose. What he said here is time-tested approaches to how problems are being solved should be challenged over and over and over again. Because if these things have been around for 50, 60, 70 years or longer, and people are saying that these systems work because they're time-tested, they're probably just old, stale. So constantly work with finding a new way or a novel way to attack a problem that had been reliant on some established system. Because there might be a better way to do it. And it takes those types of problem-solving people, those creative people, to make those changes that we need to make in order to meet these goals that we have as a planet. In order to stop exhausting the planet's resources so much, we're going to need some novel ideas to these classic problems. This was my favorite one. To be successful, start small. And he outlined something called the mundanity of excellence. And he says, verbatim, high performance is not normally a result of quantum leaps or innate talent, but rather comes from a disciplined series of small improvements. Small changes, smaller bites, done consistently, are boring, but they're the most effective. A lot of people, and I hate to bring them up again, I hate to pick on them, but these Redditors, they were trying to strike it big with AMC and GameStop and Nokia and BlackBerry and all these different stocks that are built on companies that have made some either poor decisions or gone through some tough times due to things that were out of their control. Either way, these guys are going for long shots. They're shooting for the moon, as they say. They've got diamond hands, blah, blah, blah. It's not sustainable. And maybe I sound like a hater right now, and that's probably because I missed out on that. But I can tell you that small changes, and I totally agree with Mr. Geen on this, small changes made over time are boring but effective. The mundanity of excellence. For the next one, anticipate dead ends. This is something that, and I keep bringing these back to stocks, but that's just because I love the act of buying and selling and trading. It's been a very fun experience for me over the past 3 years. And I mentioned in the last podcast that there was a year that I lost 62%. And I can tell you because I didn't anticipate dead ends. I bought a stock in a emerging market because I suspected that things were going to change with the government, that were going to affect this industry. I bought in way too early. And as it was dropping precipitously, I was buying the dip and I was losing even more. And after a full year of trying to make this work, I lost 62%. I had to back out for a little bit and think about my life before I went back in. It was a very tough time for me, but it was a very amazing learning opportunity. I would not be as successful as I am now in this realm if I hadn't experienced that huge failure. But I didn't necessarily need to have that huge failure, or at least that big of a huge failure. So anticipate dead ends. The next one, approach uncertainty with optimism. And this is something I kind of just touched on in that last point, but the pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, while the optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. And I am a recovering pessimist because I definitely, when I used to see these challenges, I didn't see them as an opportunity like I do now. I'm seeing things differently now, and I think that it's definitely not only made me more productive, but made me happier, more content, I'll say. Happy is a very fleeting feeling that everyone chases, but no one really fully understands, and you don't really know I feel like happiness is just like a choice in your mind, and sometimes your mind just can't keep it up, and so it's fleeting. But contentedness, satisfaction, those are things that I feel are worthy pursuits, and those are sustainable. And you do that with a little bit of an optimist mindset. Don't be scared of scarcity. Scarcity drives innovation. Scarcity brings out the creative side of people. And honestly, it'll probably improve us as a society if I'm thinking about this the way he's thinking about this with resources and how we're consuming. We'll probably be better off if we make it through this because we use that scarcity to foster an environment where we become more creative, more adaptable. And then the final one, take the current, ride that wave. And this is something that maybe I haven't learned fully yet. Again, Redditors, Wall Street Bets, you guys are smarter than I am. Maybe I'm just not hopping on the train like I should. But take the current. I give this book 4 out of 5 stars. I gave Mr. Maine, my last book that I was reading, Gucci Mane's Guide to Greatness, I gave it 3 stars. I give this one 4 stars because just the sheer amount of interesting facts and thought-provoking ideas throughout the book was, it caused some change. And that's what I always look for in a book is some sort of fundamental change, something so interesting or so damning that I have to take note. On to the next segment, stocks. Oh my gosh. Right after my last podcast, there was this huge tech sell-off. I mean, it was bad. And I went through some oh my gosh, what is happening? Because there were some people now, but Christian Bale played him in The Big Short, which is a movie about the housing bubble. And this guy has been tweeting, hey, there's going to be not just a market correction, but probably a little bit of not precipitous fall, but there's going to be some pain in the future. And he actually bought some puts on Tesla and made quite a bit of money off that. So there's this huge tech sell-off, and right now people are labeling it a correction, which is a positive thing. It's like skimming that excess kind of too airy foam off the top of your coffee drink. Just removing some of that excess to where it's that healthy amount, that clean amount of that drink, more palatable. And over the past, I think it said 32 corrections, the market's continued on to improve generally and especially in the tech industry. So if you've been feeling the pain like I have over the past couple of weeks, do not fear. Right now it's being labeled as a correction. And so here's what I read on, I use TD Ameritrade for my trading, and they give you a little education portion on their website. And I watched a couple videos, and here's what they recommend. First one that I watched was 3 tips for surviving a market sell-off. Rushing for the exit exasperates the issue. Ignore the noise. The stock market has handled numerous regressions and goes on to perform admirably. Sometimes the best action is no action. That was one of my favorite points that they made. Sometimes the best action is no action. And also, when times like this are happening, it is very beneficial to have some capital just in your cash account, not tied up in some stocks, so that you can take that cash that you have off on the side. And this is something that I actually did right this time. And when it drops like that, and you believe in that stock, those Apples, those Facebooks, those Googles, those Amazons, all of those types of stocks, the ones that are going to continue to perform well, almost too big to fail, kind of like the banks, which is another topic that I don't want to broach right now. But if you believe in those companies and you know they're going to rebound, you just know it in your heart, selling is just an emotional response, and you just got to be tougher. You got to be tougher in times like this. So if you continue to buy the dips, as I like to say, along with pretty much everyone else on Reddit, then you're doing the right thing, I think. Again, I am not a financial advisor. I'm not certified, but I've seen some success recently, and I want to share those types of things with you guys. So the second thing was recovering from investment loss. And what this one boiled down to was, don't, again, try to knock it out of the park in order to regain all your losses immediately. Don't sell everything in those stocks that you believe in and try to find a speculative stock that has a lot of growth potential and dump all your money into that, because you're asking to lose even more. And that's what usually happens. So it's called the Drawdown Effect. And if it's named, it means it's happened a lot and you're not alone. And this feeling of wanting to just recoup those losses immediately. I urge you to just be patient. All right, so now we're moving on to science and tech. This one's just cool because it's about a what could have been, and it's from BBC Future. So the first item is the Apollo 11 landing, not on Mars, but back on planet Earth. And there was a lot of fear that when these guys came back, they were going to bring some microbes from outer space, some alien microbes that we wouldn't be prepared for and could cause a huge issue on the public health side. Could affect a lot of people, billions of people, could have done some terrible things. And so they actually had quarantine measures in place for these guys. They weren't going to pop the hatch until they could send them through some quarantine machinery. I guess they were going to get sprayed down and treated and tested before they were exposed to the outside world. And Houston decided to pop the hatch early anyways because the astronauts were complaining that they were hot. So that was one time where we could have just royally screwed up. Thankfully, nothing happened, but it was definitely a model that they had prepared for, and then just at the stroke of one guy deciding that he didn't want his astronauts to be uncomfortable anymore, put the whole planet at risk. The second time was during the Manhattan Project. So before they started actually testing these nukes out in Nevada, there were a bunch of calculations done about all the possible outcomes of these tests. And there was one group of people that came up with an outcome where the atmosphere would catch on fire due to runaway fusion caused by the fission event that was the nuclear bomb. And they were afraid that they were literally going to catch the atmosphere on fire and kill everybody on planet Earth. And in fact, when the first test happened, the flash happened, and it stayed and remained for so long in some of these people's eyes that they started panicking, thinking that the worst had happened. So definitely some cool things to look into. Just some amazing moments where some oversight, some very scary shit happens, and we just kind of never learn about it or don't care to learn about it, or it's framed in a certain way where we never learned about it. But just two events that could have ended terribly. On to the exercise challenge. No one beat me on my last one, so I'm gonna up the ante here a little bit. Not only am I gonna make this one a little bit harder, but what I'm going to do is for everyone that submits their time for this challenge that I'm about to tell you, I'm gonna enter you into a raffle for a free book. And it's probably gonna be this next book that I read. If you beat me and you win the whole challenge, you're number one on the leaderboard, I will get you that same book, and I will get you a bottle of bourbon. So let's get some challengers in here, and here's the challenge. And it was granted to me by a buddy of mine who was like, hey, we should do this just for the hell of it. And I said, bet. It's 200 air squats followed by a mile, 150 burpees followed by a mile, 100 pull-ups followed by a mile, and 50 T push-ups, also followed by a mile. Incredibly hard. I am going to probably hate my life. One more thing of note, I'm only going to try this twice. I'm going to do it one time probably this next week, and then one more time before our next podcast. And those are the only two times I'm going to try it. If you beat me on those two times, then the win is yours. Celebrate accordingly. And now the final part, and again, my favorite part, it's the bourbon. This time I'm going to pit two bourbons against each other. One bourbon, Angel's Envy from Louisville, Kentucky, $52 a bottle. The other, Bulleit, also from Louisville, Kentucky, it's closer to $33, And I kind of have a little bit of, I want the underdog to win. I think this would be beneficial for people that are still trying bourbon for the first time or still branching out, because better is usually already always equated with more expensive, and I want to challenge that. So just straight from their sites again, you know how it is. For Angel's Envy, it's aged 6 years and then 6 months in port wine barrels. So 6 years in charred oak, and then 6 months in port wine barrels that are imported from Portugal. On the nose, it's notes of subtle vanilla, raisins, maple syrup, and toasted nuts. Its palate got a vanilla, ripe fruit, maple syrup, and like a toast taste to it. And then it finishes clean with a lingering sweetness. And then Bulleit, its nose, gentle spiciness and sweet oak, with a palate of smooth tones of maple, oak, and nutmeg. And then they finish long and dry, satiny with a light toffee flavor. So one thing of note while I load these up is Bulleit. I don't want to skew anyone to this just based off of this information, but it's some information that I thought was interesting. But Bulleit sources all of its corn mash, from Shelby County, which is also in Kentucky. So millions of barrels. They source all their corn from farms in Shelby County, Kentucky, which I thought was really cool. All right. So we've got Angel's Envy in my Rogers glass. I'm going to start off with that one. What I'm most interested in here with the difference between these two is what does that port wine barrel, what's the effect that it has on the mouthfeel? In my mind, I kind of think that it'd be more acidic, but I don't know. This is what I'm here for. Here's what I'm providing you. Let me get a little palate cleanser here. We've got our Bulleit in the Atlanta National Golf Club glass. Man, I hate to admit it, I really do. Angel's Envy is worth that extra amount of money. And what's crazy is that Bulleit, I have some really nice memories with Bulleit from college. It was the go-to. It was always cheaper, and I thought it was good. And don't get me wrong, it is a good bourbon, but man, for the extra, $18? It's worth it. I think what makes it worth it is, I think it's the finish. I think the finish alone. First, I think it's in the palate. They're similar somewhat in a way, but on the front end with the nose, and then on the back end with the finish, Angel's Envy just kicks Bulleit in the teeth. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. It's much more pleasant on the front. I do get that maple syrup feel to it. And then it's, when they say clean and lingering sweetness, it is clean. And it does linger a little bit, but it's so much more soothing. Successfully completed episode 2 of Milk and Bourbon. I give Angel's Envy 4 out of 5. And then I give Bulleit 3 out of 5. And I'm going to finish with a toast that my grandfather used to do that my dad showed me a long time ago. It goes up to it, down to it, damn the man that can't do it. Thank you guys for coming today.
Fresh, pure, and energizing milk and bourbon on the rock.